Pedro from A&P-Reacts. I'm here today with Phil of Khemmis to talk about Deceiver, out November 19th on Nuclear Blast. How's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing better now because I've got to listen to the album.
Oh, sick. They sent it to you?
Yeah, and it
Nice.
was absolutely amazing. And I have to start off, by the way, I love your coffee mug.
Oh,
Uh,
thanks. It's Andrew WK. You know Andrew WK?
yeah,
Yeah.
that is
The
great.
the party
Coffee
god.
counts as parting. When I saw parting, I kind of figured who it was.
Yeah.
Uh, so listening to this album, the first question that I have for you is, where did the idea and concept start to brew and start to materialize?
I think it became pretty clear like maybe in June of 2020 that the record wasn't going to just be like a bunch of unrelated songs or like cover a bunch of different topics. It was like really all that I was thinking about was like, what is the point in my existence in the face of all of like this collective trauma that we're all experiencing? With like literally millions of people dying. There's all these social justice issues in the US that are coming to the forefront and that are not issues because they're sort of about like people of color's rights and women's rights to body autonomy and like these kinds of things that I don't really feel like it's a approaching middle age white middle class straight guys. Like no one needs that guy's opinion about what's going on. And like I kind of had this like concept for the album before this, but it was really like proving to me to be something I couldn't write about because it wasn't honest for where I was at. And where I was at was just like, this is who I am. This is what's happening right now. I don't have anything meaningful to add to the conversation. And I need to find something that gives me the motivation to like really carry on both, in life, but also in terms of the band. Like I need to reconnect with my motivation for making this music for myself. And what that meant was like not until I was trying to write lyrics and it just wasn't happening. And we were working on the song Living Pyre. And I was just journaling one day and I said that like there's nothing left to give, nothing to rake through coals that I can use to keep the flame alive inside. And I was like, this is an honest place for me to start writing this album from, is like admitting that I don't feel like there's anything left that I have to contribute. And we'll sort of see what opens up from there. And then it really became obvious that that was kind of just a story that I was telling myself, that like I didn't deserve to share anything else about me or about my personal experience. And then I was like thinking, like, what are the other stories that I tell myself that I know are lies, but that like I use to sort of either protect myself or keep myself like small or, you know, it's all about like, really the album is about like this deception that your mind sort of has in store for you throughout your life, that you're like bound to some kind of certain fate, or like that your family's history determines who you will be, or that you're too broken to contribute to society, or that there's something wrong with you that's unfixable, or that like your addictions or your struggles with mental illness will always keep you back from attaining whatever it is that you want to do. So kind of each song is like wrestling with a different story that I find that I tell myself. And I kind of see it as like the album sort of starts with like this big opus, and then it like opens up the ground to like these personal hells that I think we all experience, but in this case are ones that I was wrestling with at the time. And then we sort of like work our way back from like the deepest hell on House of Cadmus until we sort of like get to the point where you're just like see the light again at the end of the last track, Astral Road. So it doesn't even end on a very hopeful note. And in fact, like the album ends on an unresolved like chord space where, you know, there isn't a happy resolution. Like we are, if you're somebody that struggles with mental illness, like that is something you'll struggle with your whole life. If you have addiction problems, like that is something that you have to contend with every day. Like there is no resolution. But the album kind of tries to sort of find this place of peace and like acknowledging really that the lesson that I learned from this is like, if I'm willing to be honest with myself and vulnerable about what I'm struggling with, and I share that openly, then I think that other people can also begin to do the same thing. And that it's really through acknowledging, like, oh, I'm broken. I see that you are too. And like, it's those cracks in our walls that let us sort of see the light in another person. And that hopefully that can kind of like restore some humanity in a situation where I think we become too divorced from that. So that's a really long-winded explanation to your
Oh,
question, but like
it's
that's the
super
whole thing.
it's super interesting, and that takes me to my next point. So what do you think is the worst kind of deceiving, the one that comes from the outside or the one that you do to yourself?
Um, they're both bad in their own way, obviously, but the one that was most felt by me was really that personal deception. And that I think that that can be the hardest one to get over. Like if you've convinced yourself that you're worthless and that there's nothing left for you to give, then that's a really hard place to come back from. Um, Whereas, like, if you have external things to blame for something, it can be a lot easier to find a scapegoat for it or whatever, which we see people doing all the time. But it's a lot harder to just kind of stare into the void of your own personal sort of like shortcomings and come back from it feeling like you've learned something. Like it can be really hard to get to that spot. And I won't say that I'm like an expert in it by any means, but I'm trying to work on developing compassion for that side of myself and being willing to at least look and reckon with it.
When you look at yourself in the mirror now, do you see a different person than the one that started this album, considering the process that you went through in creating this record and perhaps diving deep into some of those demons?
Yeah, like I said, it's not really like something that I think there's ever any like true resolution to, but um it's like a daily practice. Like I do like literally a daily self-compassion practice um to try and sort of make myself have the love for myself that I deserve and need to sort of get through this, which like I would have felt so uncomfortable with saying a year ago. Um, but you know, it's just an honest truth that I think that like if we're trying to share anything of meaning and value with the world, that it needs to come from a place where we have enough sort of value in ourselves first to really be able to give that. Um, and I think all my life I've struggled with like the idea of feeling like I can give a lot of love and attention to things outside of me, but that I've struggled really hard with doing that for myself. And so the me that I see now is someone who's more comfortable with that idea, even if it's something that I have to practice every day, like consciously sort of keep it up. But yeah, making the album and like, you know, quite literally like committing these thoughts and ideas to tape and then like sending them out into the world where they're open for interpretation from other people, you know, it really kind of does free you from something to a degree to be able to like literally make it something external to you. And so that's always kind of what making an album is for me, because it's always something that's really personal. But in this case, I think it was even more sort of like raw and um, straightforward, like what the issues are that I'm contending with. And so it feels like a little bit more kind of like an honest reflection of um, myself and of really the other guys in the band too. And like that then putting it out there, it sort of it's a therapeutic exercise, you know, for yourself to do that.
When I was listening to the record, I felt like the DNA of the band is there. This is a Khemmis album, but at the same time, it feels quite differently. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it, that felt perhaps a little bit different from the previous albums, is how
Mm-hmm.
nicely sequenced the structure of the record was put together. And I wasn't sure if this was something that the concept behind it drove, or if you actually put some thought process in ensuring that these songs would not just be individual songs, but there was a sense of continuity, like passing of the baton from track to track, which I find is phenomenal on this record because it gives you no
Mm-hmm.
pauses, no breaks. So did you think about that sort of sequence, or was just that a result of the concept itself?
Yeah, we really both. I mean, we once it was sort of clear like what the concept was to me, and I wouldn't say that like I even had like the ideas for each song necessarily in place yet, but I tried to kind of like write the lyrics knowing where each track was in the track sequence and just like the feeling that that song was giving me. Um, but the track sequencing like we had figured out before we went into the studio, like we knew which track was in which spot and sort of how those songs were supposed to transition into each other. And you know, it's not like one flowing piece. Like I think each song has a really unique DNA. But yeah, we tried to sort of pace with an album view, like where the like clean guitar moments are and where like the heaviest moments are, so that it's sort of paying off in a gratifying way across the whole 6 song cycle instead of just like within each track. So there's like a little bit more dynamic and variety to the sound on this album overall too. So I think that kind of helps. Like it feels like there's more sort of mountains and valleys to climb, and um, hopefully it ends up feeling like a journey.
Yeah, it's super engaging from that perspective because you don't feel like it's almost like when you're watching a really good movie or you're reading a really good book, you don't want to put it down because you're always interested to see what the next page or what the next scene is going to bring. And the record kind of felt that way too. With each song, it left you like your mouth watering for what is the next
Hmm.
track is going to bring next. So from that perspective, I thought the album was just absolutely perfect. It had this complete fluidity from start to finish.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was very much our intention, is like that we want this to make sense sort of as a whole story, but each song has to complement, like the elements of that song have to make that track stand alone and like be its own journey too. So it's kind of like balancing these things across the whole album to figure out the best way to do it so that like the smaller piece is still indicative of the whole, but without giving away the whole thing.
Mhm. The music of Chemist always has a little bit of a dark nature to it. I mean, it takes you into perhaps an uncomfortable place, but I felt that on this record that that dark place, that dark corner, was even more prevalent. It was noticeable from beginning to end. Is that
Mhm.
just a result of the concept, or did you guys change something in the sound that would emphasize that sense of darkness and even heaviness at times?
I think it was kind of there even before, like, I had any idea of what the actual lyrical concept was going to be. Like, it just so happened that, like, when we first started working on some ideas um, before the pandemic hit, like in late 2019, that we were kind of like experimenting with just trying to push more of our like black and death metal influences, which have always been there, but like trying to make those more apparent on this record. Like on the last record on Desolation, we kind of like went whole hog with our trad metal influences, and we were like, oh, we did that. I'm glad we did that, but that doesn't feel like what we want to do next necessarily to keep like pushing in that direction. Like, what if we make this our darkest album yet? And what if we embrace way more explicitly like a Swedish melodeath influence and black metal and, these other things that have always been part of who we are, but that haven't been that explicit, and um, that will sort of make songs that are going to make more natural space for things like the heavy vocals Like, I think that on this record, they fit better than they ever have because we created the spaces for that to happen where like it makes sense with the style that's going on. And so really it was kind of just about like wanting to flex those muscles more than before. And then as a result, the song's feeling a lot darker and us really wanting to like create an unrelentingly sort of dark atmosphere to the whole thing. Um, to reinforce the lyrical concept once it was sort of figured out that we didn't really want like on past albums we've always sort of had like on each song like a triumphant part that kind of like brings the resolution to a track, but like on this album we were like what if we like keep ourselves from delivering that until the very end and like sort of restrain that instinct. Still try and provide like climactic moments to songs or even like what I see as kind of anti-climaxes like on House of Cadmus at the end. It's like the song gets really slow and really sad and like doing really low vocals. It's the exact opposite of what we would normally do on a song to like provide the climax, but like it's just as effective. And so yeah, it's all really purposeful, and you know, it's partially just what we wanted to do musically, and also it ended up just being a good fit with what we were talking about. So it all came together pretty organically.
With all the changes that you guys brought into this record, from the theme to the way the sound comes together, is this an album that breaks a little bit the mold that you guys had? And if it does, how much of this path do you see the band going forward, traveling down this road?
I think it breaks tradition a little bit for us in that we've always sort of seen the like twin guitar harmony parts of the songs as being like one of, if not the main sort of like melodic hook in the songs previously. And that I think we were beginning to feel like that's a little bit of a crutch. Like it's maybe a little bit too close to like some Thin Lizzy worship or something if like every single song has to have those moments. So we were pretty consciously trying to not do that on this album. And really only on like Living Pyre is there like a true kind of twin guitar like harmony moment that's supposed to be that same kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so we were trying to kind of defy our own songwriting process a little bit by doing that and just see what we could do then. Like now the vocals have to be the hook on the song. So like we have to make these songs catchier and provide like better choruses for it to still hit the same marks. Um, but I think that the like the overall sort of darker tone is really just like indicative of where we're at right now. And I wouldn't say that that's like a conscious effort to subvert anything that we've done before. Like I think it's always been there. It's just maybe more apparent on this one. And that if the next record is being made in a different headspace, I don't think it should have to feel the same. I mean, I think there's always going to be death and black metal like influenced parts on our records. Um, and we're never going to just be delivering like a traditional doom record, I don't think. But whether or not that ends up meaning that like the next record kind of has like a thrash bent or something like remains to be seen. Like we might just do something different. I feel like the good thing about Khemmis' sound is that it's pretty wide ranging and we can kind of do whatever it is we want stylistically and have the confidence that it'll still sound like us. So I don't think we're beholden to anything we did on this record, but I think it's effective for what we did this time.
When you create an album like this, an album that has that dark underlaying in the sound, in the atmosphere, and the lyrical content, how do you create an album that has that, but at the same time doesn't suffocate the listeners across 6 songs that by the end of it, you're like, oh my God, I need a shower. I need to repent, you know,
Yeah.
like, how do you balance those two worlds? Because I thought at the end of the record, for as draining as the album was, I wanted to listen to it again because it was just so enjoyable to go through this journey.
I don't know. I mean, I think to some degree, like the band is always going to be one with a pretty strong melodic focus. Our strength doesn't really lie in like writing dissonant riffs necessarily or doing anything that's too abstract that it doesn't come across pretty directly like on first listen. And so I think that just like that inherent melodicism and we're also pretty focused on songwriting. Like we really want each song and every section of the song to sort of further the mission of that song and not just have parts exist for their own sake. So I think in some ways, like our music in this album is pretty accessible because it is melodic inherently and like has song structures, even if they're somewhat linear sometimes, that like do include repetition of some parts and always, at least to us, makes sense like as a trajectory for that track. Um, and I think all of that is in service of trying to make the music approachable to people. Um, and just that's kind of what we like to hear too. Like, I think it's personally kind of hard to put up with anything that remains like too dissonant. There's still something about like those early Gorguts records, for instance, where there's like memorable parts. It doesn't just get lost in like trying to drown you and stuff. And so we're not really trying to do the same thing. It's the topical matter can be really dark and sort of overwhelming, but there's always going to be like those hooks and those moments of feeling like you're kind of along for the ride and you overcame something too, or better understood something, or there's something just kind of cathartic, hopefully, about listening to it that makes it be something that like you want to opt into rather than out of after listening to the album.
And you mentioned melody, and I think one of the places where you guys place it perfectly was in the guitar solos. I thought the guitar solos on this
Mm.
record kind of gave me a little bit of a chance to go up for air when I was perhaps drowning in that darkness.
Mm.
Was that the goal that you guys had with the solos, to make them a little bit extra melodic in order to give a little bit of a breather within the tracks?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I know that Ben plays most of the solos on this album, up until the second half of the record. At least it's like all him. And I know that what he was trying to do with this album was like have each solo really serve that song and kind of tell its own story. Um, and so I would say if you're getting that out of it, then he was successful in that. And those really are always going to be like fundamentally, I see us as like a rock and roll band. Like I don't really see us as a doom band. Um, I do see us as like a heavy metal band, but that's also kind of just rock and roll too. So like I've always seen us as spiritually kind of aligned to like early Judas Priest in terms of like wanting to experiment with a bunch of different sounds, writing these pretty long and epic songs. And I think also in Judas Priest, like those guitar solos are kind of like a moment of air and like where they kind of flex their rock and roll muscles,
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally.
And so maybe it's kind of the same thing that's happening here. It's just sort of like that's the moment where it becomes fun for a little bit. And then like before we drag you back
We
into
get
the
serious again.
yeah, exactly. Um, and I know that like for the solos that I did do, like I was really focused on um, not trying to have them be like really that technical at all, just like deliver something that's memorable. And that's kind of always been my approach for my solos on the record. But, something like on the last song at the beginning of the song, there's a really pretty long sort of like Pink Floyd, David Gilmour inspired guitar solo that opens the song. And like with that, I just wanted it to be like this is kind of like a Pink Floyd thing, and like the idea what that is for the whole solo to be singable. So, anytime you can do that, it's going to hopefully be memorable.
It definitely achieved that. And you mentioned the harsh vocals on this record briefly, but I want to ask you this: when you have the cleans and harsh, and you have an album that has this sort of thought process behind it, did you approach the vocals with a game plan in terms of, for this sort of mindset, I want to use more of the cleans, or for this sort of mindset, I want to go a little bit more with the harsh, or was it a little bit more organic?
Hmm. I think to some degree both. Like the We always write like the vocals after we have the whole songs like laid out, the arrangement for the songs and what the riffs are and stuff. So the structure of the songs inform which vocals are going to fit over which parts, I think, more than anything else. So, like on House of Cadmus, like it goes into like this kind of My Dying Bride esque, like big death doom riff after the second chorus. And like we felt like, this is a spot where there has to be heavy vocals. Or like on Shroud of Lethe, um, it goes into like this kind of Egyptian sounding, like really heavy death doom riff after the second chorus in that song. And it's like, there clearly needs to be like guttural vocals here. So it's kind of in service of the song and what the music is doing. But then the way that we kind of work it between me and Ben, because Ben does all the harsh vocals and I do all the clean vocals, is like that I'll have a lyrical concept for a song and I'll try and write my lyrics and he'll like edit those. And I'll often sort of, write in like Ben's vocal here. And I don't try and write the words for him, but I'll say like maybe what I have in mind for that section. Like this
Just
would
a
be cool if
placeholder.
this is, yeah, or just, if it's just a note, like um, might be interesting to think about like what kind of demon is frozen under ice in keeping with like this thing that I mentioned earlier. And then like he'll write from that perspective or whatever. Or sometimes I'll just leave it completely open and he writes whatever based on what else has happened in the song. But it means that we try to not exert too much control over each other's creative process for that. And it means that usually his vocals will end up inhabiting like a different character or point of view from what I'm trying to do. So it becomes like a conversation between the two. And I think that that's kind of an interesting dynamic for the songs as well. That it's not all just like one perspective that you're getting. And that often I would say he's kind of writing from a slightly more metaphorically based place than I am. And I'm trying to be like a little bit less poetic per se. And so the two end up creating like a cool dynamic too in terms of style, I think.
Do you guys approach the lyrics for a record when you're in the process of creating a record, or do you have a little bit of a vault where you keep some lyrics around and sometimes you go back into it?
I always do it based on what the ideas for the vocal melodies are. I don't ever work from like words to vocal melodies, except for maybe like that initial case for Living Pyre, where I just realized that like those words would work with the melody that I had in mind. But I always think it's important to write the lyrics so that they follow the natural pattern of sound that occurs in a vocal melody, and that like the number of syllables matches the rhythm of that delivery. I always like have a hard time when I'm hearing music where like clearly the lyrics were written and then sort of turned into a melody and it like is too wordy or kind of spills over in like an awkward way lyrically. That always bothers me and I find it like distracting. So I always try and work the opposite way where like I'm fitting words to a pre-existing idea. And it can be hard because sometimes it's like I can't unhear that it's this vowel sound that's happening over this part of the melody. And then I have to figure out like what the words are that work with that. And then I also have to make sure that it's like cohesive with the whole thing and that it's telling this story. So it can be pretty challenging. And usually we're working over pretty strange chord progressions and really like melodically dense chord shapes because we do a lot of playing with kind of like uncommon chords in heavy music. And so it can be really difficult to find like the right melodies for parts and then how to fit words to them. So it's like the biggest challenge for me with writing our music. And usually it doesn't come together until like we're in the studio and I have to be under a certain amount of pressure
For sure.
to do it, like otherwise I'm just like not motivated enough to try and figure it out.
I have one more question for you. And when you look at this album, do you feel like this was a challenging record considering all the moving pieces that it has, the theme behind it, the sound, what the message that you try to put together? Did that make the album extra challenging?
Yeah, I think it's probably our hardest album to write, both logistically because for the first several months of trying to come up with it, we were all working in isolation from each other and like sending back Guitar Pro, like guitar tab files of riffs and stuff, and we've never done that. So it's challenging logistically, um, and obviously, I think it's hard to get into the headspace and feel any confidence in what we were doing until it was like coming together in the studio, just because of the nature of what the songs were about. But really, I think in the end, once we sort of had the ideas for the songs and we were in the studio with them, um, in some ways it was the easiest record to make for us because we tried to leave like enough kind of open ended so that we could be spontaneous in the studio, which we haven't done before. We've always been like pretty rigid about like, this is exactly how everything's going to be. We'll go in, just hammer it out. But we had a little bit longer to record this album than we have in the past. And we just had more time and space to experiment. And I think a little bit more confidence in ourselves that it would turn out okay. So, we kind of like left it open for the studio to be a bit of a creative tool in the process as well. And I think that ends up getting captured on the record in a way where I feel like there's a bit more of spontaneous sort of energy to it than our past albums, that makes it kind of exciting to me, and that it's cool to hear moments of inspiration sort of work their way into the songs, like whether it's some vocal idea that, I just had like when I'm in the booth and decide to try and do, or whether it's guitar sounds that we experimented with like for an entire day to do on one part, or whether it's, like Ben playing a guitar line and me feeling inspired to just like grab some pedal and start twisting knobs on it like as he's playing, and having confidence that it's not going to fuck it up. And then like have that part end up being like the take that makes it into the song, like it just keeps it kind of alive in a cool way. And so it was the most fun record to have made that we've done so far. And so it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. Like it was really challenging to write, and the issues that we were dealing with in writing it were really hard to contend with. But then there was a lot of joy in like creating the actual thing. And, it, I wouldn't trade that then for anything, because it's kind of another way of releasing the negative energy behind some of this, is like you're experiencing something that actually is joyful that came because of it. And you get to bring something that I think is like beautiful into existence. And so it's been a really gratifying record. And I'd say in a lot of regards kind of reminds me of making Hunted, which I think it was like really a big moment for me in my life to sort of be making that record, and that I invested a lot of myself personally in it, the same way that I did with this one, and that I just get a lot of the same feeling with it being done as I did with that record. So, and that record really resonated with a lot of people. So I would hope that the same happens with this one, but if it doesn't, then so be it. It's kind of just how it is. You never know.
Well, you can call it the most challenging, the most fun. I will say this is the best Chemist record you guys have ever released.
Thank you.
That I think, you can agree with. It's just a phenomenal album, from the concept, from the construction, the track listing, the sound, the experience. It's just a phenomenal album, and one of those that you want to listen to it, and you want to listen to it over and over and over and over again, because it's a giver. It's an absolutely incredible album. So you guys have a phenomenal record on your hands.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I mean, I think that this has been like we've always kind of hoped that we can make a classic album. And if this is the one that does that, then I would be really grateful for everything that, you know, had to happen for it to be made. And if it's not, then that's okay too. But we're going to try and keep shooting for that at least.
Well, if people disagree with me, they have to go see a doctor and get their ears checked. Because, you know, I don't know how you can listen to this album and not be blown away by it. It's just phenomenal record, really. Like it blew me away. I'm a huge fan of the band, so my expectations were really high. But you
Mm,
guys like took the bar down and said, okay, there's no bar. Like sky is the limit. Just
mm.
enjoy it. And it's just a phenomenal album. So congratulations.
Thanks. I mean, that makes me feel good. I think that was a conscious effort to like sort of almost try and sidestep expectations as much as possible. Like, just be like, you know, coming to terms with the idea that like the band doesn't even need to exist anymore for us, that like maybe we got everything out of it that we wanted. And then sort of come back to the band with a renewed focus, want to do something else, and want to do it with the confidence that comes from having a better understanding of yourself and of what we're capable of doing together, means that like we didn't have to care about what anybody would think about the album, and it just had to be made for us. And so I'm really glad that that sort of came across for you, in terms of that, like it's almost like a new Khemmis that you're hearing to some
Yeah,
degree.
yeah, but there's still enough of the old chemist there. So that's the beauty of it. It's like you guys didn't completely shed the skin, or if you shed the skin, what's underneath that skin is still the same, right?
Yeah.
So, and that to me was the beauty of this record. It didn't feel like you guys just recreated a previous album. You give me something new, but still kept enough of the old chemist alive and well underneath it.
Yeah. I I hope that we can do that every time. I mean, that's kind of the
That's the
goal, right?
that's
Like
the goal.
we all have a unique DNA that we bring to the project. Like it's always going to sound like me singing, for better or for worse. I don't like really try to sound like anybody else, and it's always going to sound like that. Uh, we're always going to kind of play guitar the same way in this band. There's always going to be a rock and roll backbeat because we got, you know, this Texan madman playing drums with us. Uh, so it's always going to be the ingredients that it needs to sound like Khemmis, and so hopefully we can continue to do that while kind of pushing it into new and interesting spaces. And maybe the next record will be just as unexpected.
Well, Philip, thank you very much for your time, and this was an absolute pleasure. Sorry if we had some issues with the timing and everything like that. Hopefully, it didn't ruin your day. You made my day, so hopefully everything is good on your end. Thank you
Yeah,
very much for
all
your
good.
time, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
It was a pleasure. Take
Have a
care.
good one. Yeah, see you.